Poor girl applied to be maid. Billionaire CEO. Finds housekeeper with the same scar as his lost sister. Excuse me, miss, but what did you just say your birthday was? The old woman's voice trembled as she reached for her reading glasses, staring at the young maid's application form. She had seen hundreds of girls walk through her mansion's marble doors, desperate for work. But this one? This girl with quiet eyes and a scar on her wrist? My birthday's October 2nd, ma'am, the girl said softly. Why? The old woman didn't answer. She just stood up for the first time in years and whispered, That's the day my granddaughter disappeared. The girl with October in her eyes. The Whitmore estate stood like a monument to silence and old money. Tucked behind iron gates and rows of autumn-hardened oaks in upstate Connecticut, the estate had seen its share of life weddings and wars, scandals and secrets, all tucked away behind its stone walls and ivy-covered windows. But for the past 2 decades, its grand halls had echoed mostly with the sound of emptiness. Until the morning Emily Carter walked through the front gate. She wasn't remarkable at first glance. Her coat was second-hand, her boots scuffed. She wore her dark hair pulled back into a simple braid, and she carried nothing but a folded resume and a small, worn leather bag. But there was something about her eyes, steady, unreadable, that made the staff look up as she passed, like she was used to not being seen, but never surprised when someone finally did. She had answered a job ad taped to the grocery store window, 3 towns over. Full-time live-in housekeeper. Must be discreet. Apply in person. Whitmore Estate. Most girls wouldn't have dared, but Emily wasn't most girls. She had no one to call, no home to return to, and no more illusions about fairy tales. A year ago, she'd been someone else entirely, engaged to a promising young architect, working nights at the diner to help him through grad school, believing in vows and warm kitchens and rainy day promises. But then came the message on his phone. And the ring on her finger? It came off that same night. Since then, Emily had kept moving, motel to motel, job to job, never staying long enough to grow roots or regrets. But something about the ad Deneen Whitmore had made her pause. It wasn't that the name was familiar, it was that it stirred something old inside her. A name she might have heard in childhood, back when her life was still measured in school lunches and bedtime stories. Back when she still had a mother. She didn't expect much from the interview, just a chance, a room, a roof, maybe some peace. But what she didn't know was that Eleanor Whitmore, the aging matriarch of the estate, hadn't spoken more than 5 words to any applicant in years. Not since the fire. Not since the day her only granddaughter vanished without a trace, 2 weeks after her daughter died in childbirth. They said Eleanor never recovered. Now she lived in the East Wing, wheelchair-bound, cared for by nurses who came and went, attended only by silence and classical music on low volume. The household obeyed her every rule. No perfume, no loud shoes, no cell phones in the parlor. But none dared speak her name when she passed. Till that day. Emily arrived precisely at 10 o'clock a.m., escorted through the side door by a sharply dressed woman who introduced herself as Clarice, the household's assistant manager. She doesn't usually meet with applicants anymore, Clarice said, her voice clipped. But for some reason, she asked to see you directly. Emily's hands tightened slightly around the leather handle of her bag. Is that unusual? Clarice didn't answer. She just led the way. They passed through a corridor lined with oil portraits and dusty chandeliers, then into a small sitting room with velvet drapes drawn against the cold November light. A fire crackled low in the hearth. Eleanor Whitmore sat facing the window. Her white hair was tied neatly behind her neck, her shawl draped perfectly over her lap. She didn't turn when they entered. "Leave us," she said without looking up. Clary hesitated, just for a second, then nodded and closed the door behind her. Emily stood silently, unsure what to say. Then Eleanor turned, and for a moment, time itself seemed to catch its breath. The old woman's pale blue eyes, still sharp despite the years, locked onto Emily's face with a sudden intensity that made the young woman shift her weight unconsciously. "What did you say your name was?" Eleanor asked, her voice soft but unwavering. "Emily Carter," Emily replied. "I'm here about the housekeeping position." Eleanor didn't respond right away. Her gaze swept over Emily, her posture, her voice, the faint scar just under her left eye. Then she asked, "Why were you born?" Emily blinked. "Excuse me?" "Your birthday," the old woman repeated. "The date?" Emily hesitated, confused. "October 2nd, 1997. For a long, trembling moment, Eleanor Whitmore sat very still. Her hands clutched the shawl tighter against her chest. Then she whispered, as if to herself, "That's the day she disappeared." Emily didn't know what she meant. Not yet. She didn't know that somewhere in the East Wing, inside a locked drawer, there was a photograph of a 5-year-old girl with the same dark hair, the same steady eyes, and the same faint scar under her left eye, from a fall in the garden. She didn't know that the fire had started in the nursery. But the police had found no trace of the child's body. That for 23 years, Eleanor Whitmore had watched every young face pass her gates, hoping, praying, and every time had been disappointed. Till now. Emily Carter had only come for a job. But what she didn't realize was that this house, this family, might just be where she truly belonged all along. Chapter 1. The interview that changed everything. The teacup rattled slightly as Emily set it down, her fingers still trembling despite the heat from the Earl Grey. "I wasn't expecting tea," she murmured. Eleanor Whitmore said nothing at first. Her face was carved in calm, but her eyes hadn't left Emily's since the girl walked into the room. It wasn't suspicion. It was something heavier. Like trying to remember a dream you once lived inside but haven't spoken of in 20 years. "No one ever is," Eleanor replied softly. "We only offer it when someone matters." The fire popped in the hearth. Emily shifted in her chair. She'd had interviews before, at cleaning agencies, at nursing homes, even once at a museum. They all blurred together in her mind. Forms, checklists, disinterest. No one ever noticed the scar beneath her left eye or the way she ironed her blouse 3 times before arriving. But this woman? This woman was studying her as if every answer mattered. "You said October 2nd, Eleanor repeated, as if testing the sound of it again. "Ma'am. Your mother's name." Emily blinked. Laura Carter. She passed when I was 10. Eleanor inhaled sharply. Her fingers gripped the armrest. "And your father?" "I never knew him." Another long pause. Emily tried not to squirm under. "You usually ask these things in interviews?" she asked with a nervous smile. Eleanor's lips twitched. "No, I don't usually conduct interviews at all." Emily looked around the parlor. The walls were lined with books and memories. A music box sat unopened on a shelf. The chandelier above glowed faintly gold, though only 2 of its bulbs still worked. The house had that scent old estates carry, paper and rosewater and time. She felt out of place, like she had stepped into someone else's memory. Eleanor studied her a moment longer, then finally nodded. "Clara says you're quiet, diligent, clean, you don't gossip, you keep your head down." "That's how I was raised," Emily said. "And raised you?" Emily hesitated. "My foster mother, in Bridgeport." "You were in the system?" "Until I aged out." Eleanor's expression didn't change, but something in her posture softened, almost imperceptibly. "You'll find," the old woman said, "that people who come from pain often carry it better than those who come from privilege." Emily didn't know how to respond to that. Instead, she stared at the dancing shadows in the fireplace, wondering what kind of place this really was. It wasn't just the size, it was the silence. The air carried grief like dust. Someone had cried in these rooms, often. She could feel it in the floorboards. "Why this job?" Eleanor asked suddenly. Emily blinked. I need the work." "That's not what I meant." Emily looked down. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Because it's far from where I came from. Because I need somewhere quiet. Somewhere no one knows me." Eleanor tilted her head. "You think this house is quiet?" Emily looked up, surprised. "Isn't it?" The old woman gave the faintest smile. "There are ghosts in these halls, child. You just haven't heard them yet." Emily's throat tightened. "Come," Eleanor said, reaching for the button on her wheelchair's arm. "Walk with me." Emily stood hesitantly. "Walk with you?" Eleanor rolled her eyes. "Metaphorically, dear. You walk, I roll." She wheeled herself through a set of tall oak doors that opened into a hallway that seemed to stretch forever. Portraits lining both sides, each more solemn than the last. Emily walked beside her, her boots making soft taps against the hardwood. "Do you know the story of this house?" Eleanor asked. Emily shook her head. "No. My husband built it in 1964, every brick laid by hand. He believed permanence was the only answer to pain." Eleanor's voice drifted. "He died in the West Wing, heart attack, just 6 months after our daughter gave birth." Emily paused. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," Eleanor said. "We all grieve something." They turned left and entered what appeared to be a nursery, untouched by time. The crib stood in the corner, a small bookshelf lined with worn storybooks. Stuffed animals sat perched along the window seat like guards. Everything frozen. "I left it this way," Eleanor said, as if reading Emily's thoughts. "After the fire?" Emily turned. "Fire?" Eleanor nodded. "She was 5. My granddaughter, name was Grace." Something trembled in her voice, the first crack Emily had heard. "We said she must have wandered out, or was taken, but we never found a trace." Emily stepped slowly toward the window, staring at the cracked glass. Her hand brushed across the sill. "I think I remember a fire," she said quietly, more to herself than to Eleanor. Eleanor turned in her chair. "What did you say?" Emily blinked. I don't know. I must have misremembered." "No," Eleanor said, voice sharpening. "What do you remember?" Emily hesitated. "Just flashes, smoke, someone screaming. I always thought it was just something I imagined." Eleanor stared at her, as if seeing something not just in the present, but in the past, a thread tying 2 timelines together. "What year were you placed in the system?" "The 1998. Eleanor closed her eyes. "The same year Grace disappeared." Silent. The fire crackled somewhere behind them, but Emily barely heard it. Then Eleanor opened her eyes and said something Emily never expected to hear. "I want you to stay, not just as a housekeeper." Her voice trembled slightly. "I want to find out who you really are." Emily's breath caught. "Like me." Eleanor's hand reached up, trembling as she brushed a piece of Emily's hair back. Her fingertips grazed the faint scar beneath her left eye. "My Grace had the same scar, same birthday, same eyes." Her voice broke. "It can't just be coincidence." Emily's voice came out hoarse. "You think I'm her?" "I don't know," Eleanor whispered. "But I need to." They stood there, 2 women from different worlds, stitched together by fire and fate and unanswered questions. In another life, Emily might have run. She had survived too many disappointments to believe in belonging. But something in Eleanor's eyes, the way they shook when she looked at her, felt like home. And Emily Carter hadn't felt home in a very, very long time. Chapter 2. The Rules of the House. The house woke early. Before sunlight crept through the velvet drapes, before the staff emerged from their rooms in quiet procession, before the birds dared disturb the stillness. Emily had been up since 5. Not from obligation, but from something else entirely. That restless hum of anxiety that only appears after something irreversible has begun. She stood at the sink in the East Wing's private staff quarters, brushing her teeth over a chipped porcelain basin. The mirror above had a long crack running down the middle, splitting her reflection into 2 halves, the girl she'd been yesterday and the stranger she was becoming. She rinsed her mouth, dried her hands, and turned toward the hallway. Today, she wasn't just a guest. Today she was staff, and everyone in the Whitmore estate would know it. The kitchen smelled of coffee and lemon polish. "Morning," Clarenvere said, without looking up from her clipboard. Her voice was cool, as always. Not cold, just precise. Her gray bun was so tightly wound Emily half wondered if the woman had ever smiled in her life. "Morning," Emily replied, her voice still hoarse from sleep. Clarice gestured to a counter with a folded uniform. "You'll wear that when inside the main house. Dark gray, no jewelry, hair pulled back, no perfume, scented lotions, or makeup. Mrs. Whitmore is sensitive to strong smells." Emily nodded and took the clothes. "She eats breakfast at exactly 7:15. You'll serve the tray. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't hover. And for God's sake, never open the East Study doors." "What's in the East Study?" Clarice looked up, finally meeting Emily's eyes. "The past?" Emily wasn't sure if she meant it literally, but either way she understood. This was a house built on rules, spoken and unspoken. The spoken ones were printed, laminated, and framed on the staff kitchen wall. The unspoken ones you learned the hard way. Clarice handed her a small printed schedule. "You are to assist Eleanor only, no other duties unless assigned, and if any of the family visits." Her tone shifted ever so slightly. "Don't engage. Stay invisible." Emily frowned. "But I thought there was only Mrs. Whitmore." Clarice's lips thinned. "Let's just say, the Whitmores are like tides. Sometimes they come rushing in, and sometimes they destroy everything they touch." Before Emily could respond, Clarice gestured toward the tray. "You're late." At 7:13, Emily stood outside the sitting room doors with a breakfast tray balanced carefully between her hands. Fresh fruit, poached egg, dry toast, chamomile tea, 2 sugars. And she inhaled slowly, braced herself, and stepped inside. Eleanor was already awake, dressed in a navy shawl and reading glasses. Her gaze lifted the moment the door opened, but this time, unlike yesterday, it didn't linger. "You were early," she said. Emily blinked. "Clarice said to come at 7:15. "It's 7:14. Emily set the tray down, lips tugging into the faintest smile. "I'll try to do better tomorrow." To her surprise, Eleanor smiled back. A fraction, but it was there. Emily poured the tea, her hands practiced calm. For a moment, there was only the sound of porcelain against porcelain. Then Eleanor spoke. "They say memory is a trickster, that it hides what we need and gives us what we wish we could forget." Emily turned. "Do you remember much about your granddaughter?" The room tensed. Eleanor stirred her tea, once, twice, everything, and nothing. "Some days I swear I can still hear her humming down the hallway. Other days I can't remember the sound of her laugh." Emily sat across from her, unsure if it was allowed, but compelled to stay. "What was she like?" Eleanor tilted her head slightly. She loved foxes, wore mismatched socks on purpose, called every sunrise her first wish of the day. Emily smiled. "Sounds like she was magic." "She was," Eleanor whispered, "until the fire took her." The silence stretched. Then Eleanor looked directly at her. "Do you believe in things returning to you, even after all hope is lost?" Emily hesitated. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But I think some things, some people, never really leave." Later that afternoon, Emily explored the house. It was the first time she was alone, truly alone in the West Wing. The hallways were lined with oil paintings and tall windows, facing the garden. She passed doors that hadn't been opened in years, their knobs cold with time. One door, at the very end of the corridor, caught her attention. It wasn't locked, just closed. Her hand hovered over the brass handle. The East Study. She remembered Clarice's warning, but the stillness tugged at her. Then a voice from behind. "I wouldn't." She turned quickly. A man stood a few feet away, wearing a tailored navy coat and an expression that walked the line between curiosity and suspicion. He was in his mid-30s, with sharp cheekbones, dark blonde hair, and eyes that looked like they belonged in courtroom paintings. Cool, unreadable, ancient. "I didn't mean to snoop," Emily said quickly. "I got turned around." The man stepped closer, gaze narrowing. "You're the new girl." "Emily," she offered. He didn't take the hand she extended. Jack Whitmore. So this was him. The grandson? The heir who never visited unless, apparently, he did. "I didn't know you were in the house," she said. Jack tilted his head. "And you thought you'd open the most private room in it?" She bristled slightly. "I was just curious." He stared at her a moment longer, then unexpectedly nodded. "So was I," he said, "the first time."
With that, he walked past her, down the hall, and disappeared through a door on the right. Emily stood there, breath caught in her throat. The Whitmore family, it seemed, had a habit of appearing without warning. That night, Emily lay awake in the small servants' room tucked behind the main staircase. The ceiling creaked with age. Somewhere in the walls, water pipes clicked softly, like bones adjusting. She reached beneath the bed and pulled out the only box she owned, a shoebox covered in faded newspaper. Inside was a single photograph. A woman with bright eyes and a baby on her hip. Her mother, the baby her wore mismatched socks. Her heart thudded. What? Was it coincidence? Or was Eleanor Whitmore right? Had she somehow wandered back to the very place she came from, not just for a job, but for answers? Who wrote it? She stared at the picture long into the night, her breath slowing. Outside, in the East Wing, Eleanor Whitmore sat awake too, a faded baby sweater in her lap, the name Grace stitched faintly into the collar. And across the house, in a room filled with old files and legal books, Jack Whitmore stared at a photocopy of a missing persons case from 1998. Sorry, people. 3 pieces of a shattered past, all under one roof again. In the rules of the house, they were about to change.
Chapter 3. The Photograph in the Box. Emily didn't sleep that night. The walls of the Whitmore estate creaked and whispered like they remembered things no one dared say out loud. The kind of memories that settle into wallpaper and floorboards, waiting for someone brave enough or broken enough to find them. At 3:17 a.m., she sat up in bed. The shoebox lay on her nightstand, lit only by the soft amber glow of the hallway lamp outside her cracked door. She opened it again, slowly, as if this time the photo might give her answers it had always refused. Her mother's smile was as soft and tired as she remembered, and that baby was undeniably her. But something about the photo had always felt off, cropped too perfectly, as if it was meant to hide something just outside the frame. A name was scribbled on the back, barely legible. Dora and Gracie, summer '98. Gracie. Emily's fingers froze. She'd always assumed her mom was just writing a pet name. Grace. But what if... She brought the photograph closer. The handwriting was shaky, rushed, like someone afraid of being found. Her heart pounded. Was she Grace Whitmore? The chances of her life not knowing who she came from. But now, this crumbling house, the smell of lemon polish and memory, the sharp look in Eleanor's eyes the first time they met, it all felt like pieces clicking together. And then, she heard it. A footstep in the hallway. She quickly slid the photo back into the box, shut it, and tucked it beneath her bed. The knock came softly. "Emily?" a voice whispered. She opened the door to find Jack Whitmore standing there, barefoot, shirt half-buttoned, holding a folder. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but her throat was tight. He stepped inside without answering. "I found something," he said, walking past her toward the desk in the corner. "I'm not sure why I'm showing you this," he added, "but I think you should see it." And she closed the door behind him. Jack opened the folder and pulled out a single page, a photocopy of a missing persons. She recognized the black and white photo immediately. A 5-year-old girl, long dark hair, wide solemn eyes, a faint scar beneath the left eye. Her breath caught. It was her, named Grace Eleanor Whitmore. October 2, 1997. Missing since November 16, 2002. Location: Whitmore Estate, Westfield, CT. She sat down slowly. Where did you get this? Jack crossed his arms. My father had it in a locked file drawer. I found it last year after his stroke. I didn't know what to do with it. Emily stared at the photo, tracing the girl's face with her finger. Why show me? Jack watched her carefully. Because you have the same scar. Silence. Because the first time I saw you, he continued, you looked like someone I saw once, a long time ago, at a funeral. You were just a child, but there's something in your face I haven't forgotten. Emily swallowed hard. So you think I'm her? I don't know what I think, he said, but Eleanor does. Emily nodded, her voice quiet. She hasn't said it outright, but I can feel it, the way she watches me, like she's trying to see a ghost. Jack pulled something else from the folder, a hospital intake form. Your foster file listed this. A hospital visit, burn treatment, no parent present, no records of admission, just a girl, dropped off by a stranger and never claimed. Emily felt cold all over. I thought it was just some random injury, she said. They always told me I was found in a church parking lot. Jack nodded. Same date, same timeline. They sat in silence. Then Emily reached under her bed, pulled out the shoebox, and handed him the photo. He stared at it. Gracie, he whispered, reading the back. He looked up slowly, and for the first time, the cool detachment in his face cracked. You really might be her. The next morning, Eleanor Whitmore was waiting. Her tea had gone cold. She didn't need Clarice to tell her that something had shifted. She felt it in the quiet, in the way her hands trembled without warning. Emily entered at 7:18. Late. She held the tray carefully, but Eleanor didn't even glance at it. Why did you find? She asked softly. Emily didn't pretend to misunderstand. Instead, she walked forward, placed the tray down, and sat across from her. She opened her hands and laid the photograph between them. Eleanor looked down slowly. Her entire body stilled. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Eleanor reached for the photo with shaking hands. She turned it over. Her breath hitched. I wrote this, she whispered. Emily's voice cracked. She's me, isn't she? Eleanor's eyes filled. You remember anything? Smoke, Emily said. Screaming, a voice yelling my name. Then, darkness. Eleanor touched the photograph again. I thought I lost you. After the fire, we searched for months, years, but someone took you, hid you. Olivia whispered. Eleanor shook her head. I don't know, but I intend to find out. Emily leaned forward, eyes shining. Do you believe it? That I'm really her? Eleanor's hands reached out, slow, reverent, and touched Emily's face, her scar. I don't believe, she said. I know. By that afternoon, a quiet storm rolled through the estate. DNA tests were ordered. Clarice was told to cancel all external visitors. The East Wing was locked down for the first time in a decade. Emily stood in the hallway outside her room, feeling the walls press in. Jack joined her minutes later, sleeves rolled up, jaw tight. You okay? He asked. No? He nodded. Sane. They leaned against the wall in silence. I think the test will confirm it? She asked. Jack looked at her. I think it already has. A pause. You're more of a Whitmore than most of us ever were, he added quietly. Not because of blood, but because you're not afraid to come back. Emily turned to him, her voice raw. What if I don't belong here? Jack's gaze didn't waver. Maybe that's what belonging really is, showing up anyway. That night, Emily sat alone with the photo in her lap. The fire was low, the shadows long. She thought about all the years she'd felt misplaced, all the birthdays she spent in silence. All the mornings she'd woken up wondering if somewhere, someone out there had once called her Gracie. And now, she knew. Not completely, not yet. But enough to feel the truth in her bones. Her name had never really been lost. Just waiting, in a box. Chapter 4. The DNA Test. The Whitmore estate held its breath. For 2 days, no one spoke openly about it, but it was everywhere. In the way Clarice whispered in corners, in the way the gardener avoided eye contact, in the way Jack Whitmore walked the halls with a pen pressed tightly between his knuckles. The test was coming. And with it, the truth. Emily spent the waiting hours alternating between dread and silence. She didn't know which she feared more, that she wasn't Grace, or that she was. Because if the results confirmed what Eleanor already believed, then the life Emily had known, the identity she'd clung to for survival, would no longer be hers. It would belong to the past, to a family that had forgotten her, to a name lost in fire. And if the test said no, then she'd feel the ache of losing a home she'd only just begun to imagine. Either way, something would break. The envelope arrived at 10:04:05 in a thick white FedEx package delivered by hand. Eleanor insisted it be opened only when everyone was present. That meant Jack. That meant Emily. And that meant Clarice. They gathered in the drawing room. The windows had been cracked open just enough for the October wind to slip through, cold and sharp. Eleanor sat in her usual chair, dignified despite the tremor in her hands. Jack leaned against the mantel, arms crossed, trying, and failing, to look unaffected. Emily sat beside the fire, her fingers laced so tightly in her lap they'd turned pale. Clary stood in the back, stone-faced as ever. No one spoke, until Eleanor reached for the envelope. The sound of paper tearing echoed like thunder. She pulled out the single sheet. Her eyes scanned it once, then again. And then, she exhaled slow and shaking, and her fingers fluttered the paper to her lap. "It's her," she said quietly. "Grace Eleanor Whitmore, 99.997% match." Emily's breath caught. She didn't cry, not yet. Jack turned away, jaw clenched tight. Clarice's clipboard slipped in her hand, but she said nothing. Eleanor reached out, palm open, and Emily stood slowly and walked into her arms. For the first time in over 2 decades, the Whitmore matriarch wept. Not from grief, but from the miracle of return. The press didn't know, not yet. Eleanor made sure of that. But inside the estate, things began to shift, small things first. Emily's nameplate on the staff door was replaced with a simple brass placard, Miss Grace Whitmore. Her uniform was gone, replaced with warm knit sweaters and tailored jeans Eleanor had ordered from the city. Jack began calling her Gracie when he thought no one could hear, almost teasing, almost reverent. And Emily found herself responding to it, unsure if it was who she was or who she was becoming. But not everyone welcomed her return. Clarice had grown colder, sharper. She kept to her lists and clipped orders, but beneath it all, Emily sensed something deeper, a wound or a warning. And one morning, Emily found the shoebox she kept under her bed, moved. It hadn't been stolen, but someone had gone through it. She knew because the photo, the one with Gracie scribbled on the back, had been flipped upside down. That evening, she found Jack in the old garden shed, fixing a rusted lamppost. "You know the DNA doesn't prove everything," he said before she spoke. "It just proves a name." Emily leaned against the doorway. "You still don't believe it?" "I believe it," he said, standing, wiping his hands on a cloth. "I just think there's more going on than blood." "Clarify?" Jack nodded. "She knew my grandfather better than anyone, and she kept his secrets." Emily frowned. "Why would she care if I came back?" Jack looked at her carefully. "Because this house, this inheritance, it wasn't supposed to go to anyone. Eleanor was preparing to donate most of it, foundation, trust funds, charities. And now, to the legal heir. Emily stiffened. I didn't ask for that. Jack didn't look away, but someone else did. The next day, Emily wandered the East Wing alone. She passed the nursery again, now dusted and silent, a room frozen in time. She stepped inside. Everything was still as it had been, the tiny shoes on the shelf, the threadbare fox plush toy. A music box sat untouched on the nightstand. She reached out, turned the key. A gentle melody began to play. She'd heard it before, somewhere deep in her bones. And suddenly, a memory broke loose. A woman's voice, her mother's. This song means you're safe, always. Emily sat down on the floor, hands over her mouth. She was Grace. She was. Not because of a test, but because she remembered. Later that night, Eleanor called her into the study. There were papers spread across the desk, legal documents, a handwritten letter in Eleanor's delicate cursive. You should read this, the old woman said. Emily took it with care. It was dated November 2002, a week before the fire. My dearest Grace, and if anything ever happens to me, know this. I loved you more than I ever knew how to say, and I'm sorry I didn't fight harder for your mother. I didn't believe her when she said something wasn't right. I thought money could fix it. I was wrong. Emily's hands trembled. What did she mean? She asked. Elijah's voice was tired. Your mother believed someone in the family wanted to take you. I dismissed it. I thought she was paranoid. But the fire, she looked away. She tried to protect you. Emily stared down at the signature. It was unmistakably Eleanor's. A warning and a confession. The next morning, Emily confronted Clarice. They stood in the main hall, just beneath the portrait of Eleanor's late husband. Did you know? Emily asked, voice steady. Clarice turned slowly, her expression unreadable. Know what? And tried to make me disappear. Clarice blinked. Then, for the first time, her voice cracked. I was loyal to this family. I did what I was told, what I believed was right. Why were you told? Emily pressed. The fire was an accident, that Laura, your mother, was unstable, that she ran with you, vanished in the chaos. Why she didn't? Clarice hesitated. No, she was trying to escape, and someone made sure she didn't. Emily's hands curled into fists. Clary looked at the floor. I don't know. Liar? I swear it, Clary snapped. But I do know who made the file disappear, who erased your birth records, who told the police to stop looking. Who? Emily whispered. Clarice looked up, eyes haunted. George Whitmore, Eleanor's late husband. Chapter 5. The Man Who Burned the Past. The fireplace in the east study hadn't been lit in years. Ashes still lingered there, old, cold, silent. A tomb built of embers and forgotten things. Emily stood before it now, her arms crossed, the crackling of autumn wind outside the windows the only sound in the room. And she had spent the last hour alone in this place. Eleanor's warning letter still in her coat pocket, Clarice's confession ringing like sirens in her mind. George Whitmore? The beloved patriarch, the visionary, the man with a stern smile in all the family portraits, and a street named after him downtown. Emily had never known him, never met him. But somehow she could feel his shadow in this house. She crouched near the fireplace, brushing away decades of soot and char. Her fingertips grazed something, a metal latch built discreetly into it. He pulled. A hollow creaked open. Inside, barely visible, was a bundle of scorched paper tied with twine. Emily hesitated, then reached in and pulled it free. Upstairs, Jack paced the corridor outside Eleanor's room. His grandmother had asked for tea, then changed her mind. She was silent now, sitting in her armchair near the window, eyes on the last leaves falling from the oak trees. Did you ever suspect? Emily had asked him the night before. And he hadn't answered. because he had. Not just about her, but about the story. The fire had never made sense. The official reports claimed faulty wiring. But Jack remembered the way the investigation ended abruptly, how the files were sealed by a judge to protect the family's grief. He'd been 13 at the time, old enough to know when adults were lying. Still, he said nothing. Because back then, grief was a silence you didn't question. But now, with Grace, Emily, back in the house, with her voice, her presence, her memory, silence was no longer an option. He turned back toward the stairs, fists clenched. Something was coming, and he could feel it in his bones. Emily brought the charred bundle to her room, locked the door, and sat on the floor with it spread across her lap. Some pages were too far gone. Others were half legible, the ink blurred by fire and time. One letter stood out. Its handwriting matched the letter Eleanor had written to Grace, except this one wasn't to a child. It was addressed to Kenneth, George Whitmore's first name. Ben, you know what you're doing is wrong. Laura is frightened, and I can't blame her. You talk about legacy, about image, but what about blood? She's our daughter. You can't erase her pain just because it's inconvenient. You can't steal her child. The page cut off there. The edge was blackened, the ink eaten by flame. Emily's heart pounded. She shuffled through the bundle and found a second page, dated 2 weeks before the fire. The adoption papers are forged. I told Laura, she's going to the press if we don't stop this. She said she's leaving, that she's taking Grace and disappearing. You said you'd fix it. God help me if fixing it meant what I think it did. Emily couldn't breathe. The fire? It hadn't been an accident. It had been a cover. She pressed her palms to her face. All her life she had wondered why she was left behind. Now she knew, because someone wanted her mother gone. Because someone in this house, someone with power, had decided legacy mattered more than life. Jack found her outside the next morning, seated on the stone bench near the edge of the frostbitten rose garden. She didn't turn when she heard his footsteps. I know it was him, she said quietly. Jack stopped beside her. I know too. Emily pulled a single page from her coat and handed it to him. He tried to take me from her. My mother said she wasn't stable, wanted full custody, or worse. I think when she refused, he used the fire to cover it. Jack read in silence, his jaw tightened, hands trembling as he held the fragile letter. My God, he whispered. Your grandfather, Emily said bitterly, tried to burn me out of this family. Jack sat beside her. And now you're the only thing that can bring it back to life. She turned toward him. Why didn't anyone stop him? Because people like George Whitmore built everything on control, he said. And people like my father, they inherited the silence. They sat in quiet. Then Jack said, you should go public. Emily turned sharply. What? Tell the truth. About what happened, about who you are. I can't. You can, he said firmly. You came back from ashes. That's not weakness, Grace. That's power. She stared at him, then nodded. That night, Eleanor summoned both of them to her room. She was pale, weaker than usual, but her voice still held its fire. I want the world to know, she said, about you, about your mother, about what George did. Jack's eyes flicked to Emily. You don't have to protect the family name anymore, Emily said gently. I'm not, Eleanor said. I'm protecting the truth. She pulled a file from her drawer, a document drawn up that afternoon. Her entire estate, her shares, her name, transferred. What did Grace Eleanor Whitmore, the line read. Emily stared at it. I don't want any of this for the money, she whispered. I know, Eleanor said. That's why it belongs to you. By morning, the story had begun to stir. Jack contacted a journalist from the Boston Herald, a woman he trusted from college. Eleanor gave her blessing. And Clarice? She left the estate without a word. but not before slipping a note beneath Emily's door. I knew the truth long ago. I was too afraid to speak. I'm sorry. I pray this house is kinder to you than it was to your mother. Emily folded the note quietly. But no anger, just an ache too deep for words. The next week, the Herald ran the front page story. Up comes Mrs. Hardway again. Grace found Grace. Whitmore returns to expose family secrets, rewrite history. The article featured a black and white image of Emily as a child beside her mother, digitally restored from a scanned photo. And beside it, a full-color photograph of Emily today, standing at the top of the Whitmore staircase, proud and unshaken. The caption read, "Grace didn't survive the fire, she walked through it." Back inside the estate, Jack found her in the same parlor where they first met. And she was in Eleanor's chair, her legs curled beneath her, holding a photo album. "You look like her," he said. Emily glanced up. "My mom?" He nodded. "I don't know how to carry all of this," she said. "You don't have to carry it alone." He stepped forward, held out his hand. "Come with me," he said. "Let's start writing the next chapter." She looked down at her mother's smile in the photo, and then up at him. She took his hand. And for the first time in years, she felt like the fire behind her had finally burned out. Not because the past was erased, but because the truth was finally alive. Chapter 6. The Inheritance. The first snow came quietly. It dusted the edges of the Whitmore estate in a soft white hush, blanketing the rose garden and coating the stone fountain where Emily often sat. From her bedroom window, she watched the wind carry flakes like whispers. Winter had arrived, and with it something else. A letter, cream-colored, stamped with the Whitmore family crest, left carefully on her nightstand while she slept. She opened it slowly, the way one opens a door they're afraid to close again. To Miss Grace Eleanor Whitmore. As per the terms of the 1995 George Whitmore Estate Trust Agreement, the full Whitmore inheritance, including property, business assets, and voting rights, shall transfer solely to the legal heir upon the following conditions. 1. The heir must be identified by blood, confirmed by independent DNA testing. Fulfilled. 2. The heir must reside on the Whitmore estate for no less than 90 consecutive days prior to full execution. In progress. 3. The heir must not be married or engaged to anyone without the prior approval of the acting trustee. 4. In the event of an heir's involvement with a Whitmore male descendant, including but not limited to romantic or cohabitational partnership, the inheritance shall be considered invalid unless voted upon and unanimously approved by the remaining Board of Trustees. Emily read that last clause, then again, and a third time, just to make sure the words weren't changing. Romantic or cohabitational partnership. Jack. Downstairs, Jack sat at the kitchen table, thumbing through spreadsheets and the latest column on the Herald's article Fallout. His jaw was clenched, his coffee untouched. He heard her footsteps before he saw her. "Morning," he said without looking up. She slid the letter across the table. He didn't need to read it. He'd seen that envelope before. His expression changed the moment his eyes landed on the final clause. He looked up. "I was hoping you wouldn't see this yet." Emily crossed her arms. Jack exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "I found out yesterday. Eleanor had it pulled from the legal archives. It was buried. No one's seen it since the late 90s. "And you weren't going to tell me?" "I was trying to figure out how." The silence between them sharpened. "I'm not involved with you," she said flatly. "Not officially." His jaw twitched. "But they think you are." Emily's voice dropped. "Are you?" Jack stood, pacing now, hands shoved into his back pockets. "My grandfather was many things, but he was obsessed with control. That clause was his last attempt to keep the bloodline clean and keep outsiders or scandal out." "Why, I'm not an outsider," she snapped. "I am the bloodline." He stopped walking and nodded. "That's exactly why it's dangerous." That afternoon, Eleanor called them both to the library. She sat beneath the towering windows, her hands folded over the same letter Emily had read hours earlier. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "You knew about this?" Emily asked. I remembered, vaguely, but I thought it had been struck from the final copy. It wasn't. Jack leaned against the doorframe, silent. Emily stepped forward. "So what happens now?" Eleanor closed her eyes for a long moment. "We go public with the challenge." "Why if they don't?" Jack asked. Eleanor looked at her grandson. "Then the inheritance reverts to a contingency plan George drafted. The estate is dissolved. Most holdings go to the foundation and the Whitmore name disappears." Emily felt her chest tighten. Eleanor added, "If the relationship is proven." The room fell into silence. Jack looked at her. "You don't have to give anything up, Grace." She met his gaze. "I already gave everything up once. I didn't come back to lose it again." That night, Emily sat in the nursery again. The same music box played, winding down slowly with each turn. She pressed her forehead against the window pane, watching the snow fall in crooked lines. She didn't cry, but she wanted to. She had just begun to feel whole, to believe in her name, her history, the idea of a future that wasn't shaped by running or survival. And now the choice was clear. Jack or the inheritance. And she heard the door creak behind her. "I shouldn't be here," Jack said. "You're not," she replied, not turning around. He walked forward anyway. "Grace." She closed her eyes. "Don't call me that. Not right now." He sat on the floor beside her, back against the bookshelf. For a while, they said nothing. Then he spoke. "You know, I used to think the Whitmore legacy was the only thing I wanted. My father drilled it into me. Duty, name, legacy, image. But lately, it's starting to feel like a cage." And she looked over at him. "And what do I feel like?" Jack turned to her. "I feel like the key." The next morning, the house was unusually quiet. Clarice's old office had been converted into a war room of sorts, filled with files, press releases, and records as Eleanor prepared to take on the board. Emily sat at the head of the table, flanked by legal advisors and publicists. Her photo was on the cover of Vanity and Air, the headline reading, "Found and fought for, the Whitmore heiress who refuses to be erased." But behind every click of a camera flash, she felt it. The line. That invisible threshold between who she had become and what she would have to leave behind. The lawyer leaned in. "They're going to push the clause, hard, especially the part about the relationship." Emily folded her hands. "We're not officially involved." The lawyer raised a brow. "But there's tension, chemistry. The media's picked it up. One photo of you two standing too close, and it's over." Jack entered the room just then, tie loosened, hair windless. "Then let's fix it." Emily looked up. Jack reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded document. He slid it across the table. It was a legal affidavit. "I, Jackson Whitmore, renounce any romantic claim or intention toward Grace Whitmore, now or in the future, in full acknowledgement of the Whitmore inheritance clause." Her eyes stung. "You're sacrificing us," she whispered. He stepped closer. He said. "I'm protecting you. The real you, the one who deserves this place, the one who walked back into—" Eleanor stood slowly. "This isn't what I wanted." Jack smiled faintly. "It's what he wanted. I'm just making sure he doesn't win." Emily stared at him. "Will you regret it?" Jack leaned down, his voice barely audible. "I'll regret everything if I lose you, but I'll regret even more if I'm the reason the world loses you again." That evening, the board convened. Lawyers fought, trustees debated. The vote came down to the wire. In the end, the clause was upheld. Emily was named official heiress. The legacy remained intact. But when she stepped out of the boardroom, surrounded by applause, she scanned, and Jack was gone. Chapter 7. What's Left After Goodbye. The estate felt different now. The rooms were still grand, the chandeliers still shimmered beneath morning light, but something in the air had shifted. It was quieter. But not in the usual Whitmore kind of quiet old money, pressed napkins, hush-hush legacy, but the kind that settles in after someone you love walks away and doesn't look back. Jack was gone. No explanation, no farewell. Just a signature on the affidavit and the echo of his footsteps down the marble corridor. Emily hadn't seen him since the vote. He packed his things, left behind his cufflinks, and disappeared into the city like a ghost, wearing a last name. She sat now in Eleanor's study, staring at the chessboard Jack used to play with their grandmother. The pieces were still in mid-game, white queen threatening a black knight. Emily reached out and nudged the queen forward. Check. Her heart ached like it had been checkmated weeks ago. Across the room, Eleanor watched her over the rim of her teacup. "You haven't asked where he went," the older woman said. Emily didn't look up. "I figured if he wanted me to know, he'd tell me." Eleanor set the teacup down. "He's with your mother's foundation, the one I never funded. He's trying to restart it, quietly." Emily blinked. "Why?" "Because you matter to him," Eleanor said simply. "And he needs to matter to something again, too." Emily swallowed. "He could have told me." "Could you have asked him to stay?" Eleanor countered. Emily didn't answer. Because she couldn't. Because love, real love, wasn't always about asking someone to stay. Sometimes it was about letting them go so the other person could become who they were always meant to be, even if that meant standing in the aftermath alone. The press called it a victory. The heiress who saved the Whitmore name. Grace rises from ashes, the woman who reclaimed her legacy. But Emily felt more like the ashes than the fire. She attended board meetings, answered letters, signed endowments in cursive so elegant it felt borrowed. She gave speeches in Eleanor's tailored suits and took calls from London and Singapore as if she'd done this her whole life. But in the quiet moments when the estate lights dimmed, when the garden froze in morning frost, she felt hollow. Not because she missed who she was before, but because she missed him. The man who saw her before she ever knew who she was. On the 24th day since the vote, a package arrived. No return address. Inside was a single envelope. No note, just a photograph. Her, standing in front of the nursery, smiling slightly, caught unaware. And written in Jack's handwriting on the back. "Sometimes home isn't a place, it's the person who makes you want to stay." She sank into the hallway bench and didn't move for hours. The next day she went to the nursery, alone. The old fox plush was still perched by the window. The music box still played the lullabies she hadn't forgotten. She sat cross-legged on the floor, the photo clutched to her chest. "I thought I was done losing people," she whispered aloud. The silence didn't answer. And so she did what she hadn't done in years. She cried. Not polite tears, not the quiet weeping of someone used to grief, but the wild, aching kind. The kind you feel in your ribs, the kind that scrapes memory like glass, the kind that doesn't ask for permission. Eleanor found her there an hour later. She didn't speak, just sat beside her, frail fingers curled over Emily's. And for a moment there were no Whitmores, no legacies, no inheritance. Just a woman who had lost a granddaughter. And a granddaughter who had lost herself, again. Weeks passed. And slowly, Emily built a new rhythm. She began transforming the East Wing into a community space, one her mother once dreamed of, a therapy library for children in the foster system, a grief group, a music room with instruments and laughter, a second chance carved out of marble and ghosts. She spoke at a conference in D.C., using the words she'd written on napkins when she was 17 and homeless. She hired 3 young women from her old foster home to intern on the estate. She smiled more, laughed sometimes. But her heart? It still waited. until the morning the letter arrived. It was handwritten, no envelope, tucked beneath the garden gate. Grace, if you're reading this, I've done the coward's thing, disappeared without giving you the ending you deserved. But maybe this isn't an ending. Maybe it's the first page we both need to write on our own. I thought I could stay. I thought I could be the man who walks beside you while the world applauds. But I kept hearing his voice in my head, my father, my grandfather, telling me to protect the name, to be useful, to be powerful. You never asked me to be powerful. You only ever asked me to be honest. So here it is. I loved you. Maybe I still do. Maybe I always will. But I needed to become someone who could choose love over legacy, not just for you, but for myself. If you ever want to see who that man became, come find me. I'll be at the old cafe off 7th and Alder, the one with terrible coffee and the best lemon pie. Tuesdays, 9 a.m. Blah. Ja. Emily stood in the doorway for a long time, the letter trembling in her hands. The wind picked up, rustling the ivy on the stone walls. She folded the letter carefully and smiled. Tuesday, 8:54 a.m. The cafe was exactly as he'd described. Terrible coffee, stained tiles, too many sunflowers painted on the windows. Emily walked in slowly, but he wasn't there. Her heart fluttered. She ordered the lemon pie. Black coffee? The bell above the door jingled. Jack walked in, wearing the same navy coat, hair wind-tossed, eyes just as tired and kind as she remembered. He froze when he saw her, and she stood slowly. "You waited," she whispered. "I hoped," he said. She stepped forward. Not fast, not dramatic, but enough to close the space between them. "I'm not Grace Whitmore right now," she said, voice shaking. "I'm just Emily, the girl who used to believe in fireflies and fairy tales, the girl who lost everything and found her way back." He looked at her. "I'm not a Whitmore either," he replied. "I'm just the man who got it all wrong, until you showed me how to get it right." The silence stretched. And then she said the words that had waited through storms and signatures, through silence and sacrifice. "Come home." They walked out of the cafe hand in hand. No press, no photos, no inheritance. Just two people who had nothing left to prove. Only everything left to feel. Chapter 8. The Fireflies Return. Fireflies were late that year. Emily noticed it one evening as she stood barefoot in the old orchard behind the Whitmore estate, now converted into an outreach garden for foster youth. It was the first warm night in May, and the magnolia trees had just started to bloom. The fireflies, they hadn't come. She used to chase them, once, back when she was 5, and believed the light inside her matched theirs, quiet, glowing, full of magic. That was before fire took everything. Now, the only fire she knew was the kind you survived. Jack returned to the estate on a Thursday. He didn't knock. He just walked through the garden gate like someone returning to the only place that ever felt like both beginning and end. Emily was kneeling in the dirt, hands covered in soil, when she heard his voice. "You still talk to the flowers?" She turned, heart stalling. "Only the ones that don't interrupt me." He smirked and held out a paper bag. "Lemon pie. Peace offering." She took it. And for a moment, nothing needed to be said. Because some silences are healing. Some are a kind of love. That night, they sat on the steps of the East Wing, eating cold pie and watching the stars. "I never thought I'd come back here," Jack said. "Not after everything." Amai leaned against him. "So, why did you—" His voice dropped. "Because I finally understood something." She looked up at him. "Love doesn't make you weaker," he said. "It makes you brave enough to leave and brave enough to return." They didn't kiss. Not then. But they didn't need to. Some reunions aren't made of words or gestures. Just gravity. 2 days later, the letter arrived. This one wasn't handwritten. It came in a plain brown envelope, delivered by an unknown courier, no return address. The paper inside was faded, nearly 25 years old. A court record. Emily unfolded it slowly. It was a restraining order, dated 2 weeks before the fire. Filed by Laura Carter Whitmore, her mother, against a man named Dr. Caleb Murren. "Who is he?" Emily whispered aloud. Jack stepped into the room, reading over her shoulder. "Name doesn't ring a bell." Emily's fingers trembled. "He was my mother's therapist. It says here, he was removed from her case after she accused him of manipulation, threats, and something else." Jack's brow furrowed. "What?" She turned the page. The final statement, in her mother's handwriting, was underlined by the judge. "We said if I didn't give him access to my daughter's file, he'd make sure I didn't have a daughter at all." Emily stared at the words. The room spun. "This man, he was part of it," she whispered. "He threatened her, before the fire." Jack stepped closer. "Where is he now?" Emily looked up slowly. "I think it's time we find out." They traced the name through private databases, university records, and finally, a forgotten blog by a former patient who described Dr. Caleb Murren as a charming, cold-hearted man who manipulated every vulnerable woman he treated. Eventually, they found a recent address. Charleston, South Carolina. Private wellness clinic, still operating, still taking patients, still hiding. 3 days later, they were there. Emily stood outside the modern glass building with her mother's letter tucked into her jacket. Her hands were... "Are you sure you want to do this?" Jack asked. "I need to see his face," she said. "I need to know what he remembers." Dr. Caleb Murren looked nothing like she remembered from the single blurred photo in her foster file. He was older now, thinner, his once slicked hair, but his eyes? Still hollow. It's still dangerous. They met in his office under the guise of Emily being a potential patient. She introduced herself as Grace Carter, giving him only pieces of the truth. When he smiled and offered his hand, she didn't take it. Instead, she placed the faded court order on his desk. He stared at it for a long moment, then slowly leaned back. "You've come a long way, Miss Carter." "You remember," she said. "I remember everyone I've helped." "You didn't help her," Emily whispered. "You broke her." Dr. Murren's lips curved slightly. "I didn't need to break her. She was already fractured." Jack stepped forward. "Why threaten her?" "She was unstable," Murren replied coolly. "She thought the world owed her something. She thought raising Grace made her special. But some women mistake survival for sainthood. She was trying to protect me." He raised an eyebrow. "From what?" Emily pulled a photograph from her pocket, the one of her and her mother, taken 2 weeks before the fire. "She knew someone wanted to hurt us." Dr. Murren leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "I didn't start the fire." "You knew," Emily said, voice trembling. "You knew what George Whitmore was planning." His silence said everything. Jack's hands clenched. "Why didn't you warn her?" Dr. Murren shrugged. "Because no one listens to women like her, and frankly, no one would have believed her, not over a Whitmore." Emily's breath hitched. "You let them take her life." Dr. Murren stood. "I suggest you leave. You've gotten your answers." Jack stepped forward. "We're not done." Emily held up a hand, stopping him. Her voice was steel now. "No, he's done." She turned to Dr. Murren. "And if you so much as breathe near another patient without disclosing your past, I'll make sure your license is not just suspended, but buried." He said nothing. But for the first time, he looked afraid. As they left the building, Emily stepped into the sunlight and exhaled. "Will you feel better?" Jack asked. "No," Jishin said, "but I feel clearer." That night, back in Connecticut, she walked the orchard again. And finally, the fireflies returned. They danced low to the ground, tiny orbs of light flickering like old promises. Emily stood among them, breath catching. Her mother used to say, "The fireflies come when you're ready to hope again." She'd thought that was just a bedtime line. But maybe it had always been a prophecy. Jack joined her minutes later, watching her silhouette against the light. "You look like you did when I first saw you," he said. She turned, covered in dirt and unspeakably tired. He smiled. "No, lit from within," and she stepped toward him. And this time, they didn't hesitate. They kissed. Long, slow, unhurried. The kind of kiss that wasn't about reunion or regret, but return. They stood under the stars until the cold chased them in. And as they walked back through the garden gates, hand in hand, Emily whispered, "I'm not afraid of the past anymore." Jack looked over. "What changed?" She glanced back at the fireflies. "We stopped being ghosts," she said, "and became light." Chapter 9. The Vote to Erase Her. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. No signature, just a golden seal and a single line of type. Notice of board motion. Vote to review legitimacy of heir appointment. Emily stood in the center of the East Library, her hand trembling slightly as she read it again. Below the heading were two brutal sentences. On the basis of mental and emotional instability observed during public engagements, and in light of recent press coverage, a motion has been put forward by the Legacy Subcommittee to contest Ms. Grace Eleanor Whitmore's eligibility as heir and executor. Her breath caught, not because she didn't expect resistance, but because of who signed it. Vivian Carrington. A trustee, a friend of her grandfather's, one of the few still loyal to his name, even in death. Jack looked up from the sofa across the room, his phone still in hand. He saw her face and stood immediately. "What is it?" She handed him the letter. As he read, his jaw tightened. "She's trying to paint you as unstable." Emily's voice was hollow. "The irony is, I've never been more sane in my life." Later that afternoon, Eleanor summoned them both. The old woman sat in her chair by the garden window, framed by light but shadowed by age. A shawl draped over her knees. Her eyes were colder than Emily had ever seen them. "Vivian's done this before," Eleanor said. 30 years ago, when my husband fell ill, she tried to take over the board. She failed." Emily swallowed. "Will she fail again?" Eleanor looked at her. "That depends. How strong are you willing to be this time?" Jack leaned forward. "They're calling a vote." 3 days, Eleanor confirmed. "The motion will pass if 5 out of 7 trustees support it." "So right now?" Eleanor exhaled. 3 are already leaning toward Vivian, 1 is undecided. 2 are loyal to me. That means the swing vote. "Hasn't been seen in years," Jack finished grimly. Emily looked between them. "Who?" Eleanor paused. Then spoke a name that sent a chill through the room. Margaret Albright. Margaret Albright had once been Eleanor's closest confidante. Before the fire, before the loss, before silence fell over everything like dust. They hadn't spoken in over 20 years. Margaret had left the board shortly after Laura's death, citing irreconcilable differences. Rumors whispered that she knew something about the night Grace disappeared. But she never spoke. She'd vanished to a small coastal town in Maine, no email, no public phone. And now she was the only one who could stop Vivian. 2 hours later, Emily was in the car. She refused to send a letter. Or a lawyer, or an appeal. She was going to knock on Margaret's door herself. "This vote isn't just about power," she told Jack before leaving. "It's about whether I still belong to this family when I'm inconvenient." He nodded. "And you're going to show them you do." She squeezed his hand. "And if I don't win?" Jack's gaze didn't waver. "Then we walk away from the empire and we build something better. Together." Margaret Albright's home stood at the edge of a rocky cliff, 3 hours up the coast. It smelled like salt and wood smoke. Emily stood on the porch, heart pounding, holding a worn manila envelope filled with everything: birth certificate, DNA test, legal transfer, and her mother's letter. She knocked. Footsteps approached. The door opened. And there she was. Older, thinner, but sharp as glass. "Grace Whitmore," Margaret said without surprise. "Emily," she corrected, "though I think both belong to me now." Margaret studied her for a moment, then opened the door wider. "Come in." They sat in a sunroom overlooking the sea. The waves crashed against the cliffs below, like an echo of everything unspoken between generations. "I know why you're here," Margaret said, sipping her tea. "Vivian's campaign is clumsy, desperate. She says I'm unstable." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Are you?" Emily looked her in the eye. "No, but I'm angry. Does that count?" Margaret smiled faintly. "Not when it's earned." Emily handed her the envelope. Margaret didn't look at it. Instead, she asked quietly, "Do you know what your grandfather did to your mother?" Emily's throat tightened. "I know he tried to erase her." "Now," Margaret said. "He succeeded. Until now." Emily blinked. "I warned Eleanor," Margaret said softly. "I begged her to protect Laura, but George was persuasive, and legacy was a language Eleanor hadn't yet unlearned." "She's changed," Emily said. "I hope so," Margaret replied, "because if she hasn't, you'll be the next woman this family betrays." Emily stood. "Then maybe it's time someone rewrites the rules." Margaret finally took the envelope. She opened it slowly. She read in silence. And when she looked up, her eyes had softened. "I'll be at the vote." 3 days later, the board met in the glass atrium on the 3rd floor. Sunlight filtered in through the domed ceiling, casting long shadows across polished wood and steel. Vivian Carrington arrived in a navy powder suit, flanked by her allies. Her expression was perfectly pleasant, but her eyes glinted with triumph. Jack stood by the doors. Emily took her seat at the head of the table. She wore no makeup, designer clothes, just a gray blazer and her mother's necklace. "I know why we're here," she began, "to determine whether I'm fit to carry the name I was born into, whether grief disqualifies someone from legacy, whether emotion is weakness." She paused. "Let me be clear, I am not ashamed of my pain. I was 5 when I lost my mother. I was lost for 20 years. But I found my way back, not to power, to truth." Vivian scoffed lightly. "Truth is often rewritten by those who crave a stage." Emily turned to her. "Then, I suppose it's fortunate that I don't need one." She nodded to the door. Margaret Albright entered. Every trustee turned. Vivian's face blanched. Margaret took the final seat. "I've cast my vote," she said calmly, "and it is to uphold Grace Whitmore's position, not because of her name, but because she is the only one here brave enough to carry its consequences." The final vote? 4-3, in Emily's favor. The room fell into stunned silence. Vivian stood, gathering her papers with clipped movement. "Be careful, Miss Whitmore," she said coldly. "The world loves to build up women like you, and loves even more to watch them fall." Emily met her gaze. "Then, I guess I'll build something stronger than their applause." That night, Emily sat in the garden, beneath a sky full of stars and soft wind. Jack joined her, sitting quietly. "You did it," he said. Olivia nodded. She said, "We did." He looked at her. "Why now?" She smiled. "I stopped proving I belong." She leaned against him. "Because I already do." Chapter 10. The Ashes We Choose to Keep. The cottage hadn't been touched since the fire. Hidden on the far edge of the estate's forested grounds, the old guest house stood in solemn ruin. Ivy curled along its blackened stone walls. The windows were hollow. Its roof sagged under decades of neglect, and its silence felt different than the rest of the Whitmore estate. Not heavy like memory, but haunted like a wound that never closed. Emily stood at the gate with Jack beside her. She had dreamed of this place for years without knowing it was real. Burned beans, the scent of wet ash, a child's scream swallowed by smoke. This was where her mother had died, and where Emily Grace had disappeared. She stepped through the gate, breath catching. "I don't think I'm ready," she whispered. Jack slipped his fingers into hers. "Then let's go in slowly, together." Inside, the light fell in angled shafts through gaps in the ceiling. Ash and dirt blanketed the floor. Charred outlines of furniture still marked the space like shadows that refused to fade. Emily walked to the back wall. "This was the nursery," she said softly. Jack looked around. "Are you sure?" "I remember the wallpaper," she replied. "Stars and moons. My mother painted it by hand." She reached out and touched the wall, or what was left of it, and her hand came away streaked with soot. A single ember, buried deep, still seemed to flicker in her chest. "She tried to save me," Emily whispered. "She carried me out. Someone must have seen." Jack frowned. "Then why did they say no one survived?" Emily turned. "Because someone wanted the world to believe Grace Whitmore was gone." She knelt by the fireplace, or what was left of it, and brushed aside pieces of scorched wood. Bench saw it. A floorboard discolored but intact. Carved into it, barely visible beneath the grime, were 5 letters. Grace. Her breath hitched. Beneath that, "If they find this, tell her I tried." A single initial followed. L. Her mother's final message. Not spoken. Carved, hidden, preserved. Emily stared at it, the truth finally complete. "She knew," Emily said, voice shaking. "She knew they'd cover it up, so she left this, in case I ever came back." Jack crouched beside her, resting a hand on her back. "She believed you'd survive," he said, "and that one day you'd return." Emily reached out and pressed her hand over the name her name etched into that forgotten floor. She didn't cry. Not this time. Because grief, when honored, eventually becomes something else. A vow. A foundation. They returned to the estate in silence. Eleanor was waiting in the parlor, wrapped in a pale gray shawl, a cup of tea cooling in her hands. "Did you find anything?" she asked gently. Emily nodded. "A message." Eleanor's eyes shimmered. "From her?" Emily sat beside her. She never stopped trying. Eleanor didn't speak, but her hand reached out, closing over Emily's. "I failed her," the older woman said at last. "You believed the wrong people," Emily replied, "but you didn't stop looking." Eleanor looked over. "And now?" Emily smiled faintly. "Now, I'll keep her alive." The next morning, Emily walked into the West Wing boardroom. Instead of the usual business attire, she wore denim, boots, and a gray cardigan her mother once owned, restored and preserved from a forgotten foster box. She stood before the trustees. "I've called this meeting not to assert power," she began, "but to return it where it belongs." She gestured to the floor plans behind her, a blueprint she and Jack had spent weeks drafting. "We're rebuilding the cottage," she said, "but not as it was. It will become a shelter for women and children who survived what my mother did. It will be named after her, the Laura Grace Foundation." There were murmurs. One trustee tried to object, citing cost, legacy, risk. Emily raised a hand. "I'm not asking for permission," she said. "I'm honoring a promise that began in fire and ends in light." The vote passed. Done unanimously. By summer, construction had begun. The old cottage was taken down, carefully, beam by beam, as if it still breathed. Emily visited daily. She helped choose tile and wallpaper. She read every name on the donor list. She kept her mother's letter in her pocket, even when it frayed at the edges. Jack designed the central atrium, a 2-story reading room bathed in skylight. "Every child deserves a place that sees them," he said. She leaned over his shoulder as he sketched. "I will," she said. One evening in August, as the sun melted behind the trees and the air smelled of fresh-cut grass, Emily stood beside the newly planted magnolia tree in the courtyard. The plaque beneath it read, "Lori Laura, who loved first, fought hardest, and never stopped believing her daughter would come home." She reached into her coat and pulled out the small music box from the nursery. Still working, barely. She wound it once. The lullaby floated into the garden, and the fireflies came, hundreds of them, glowing like tiny stars across the grass and leaves, and she watched them with awe. And then a hand slipped into hers. "Jack. Always Jack. Found her," he said softly. Emily whispered. "Found me." They married in autumn. Not in a grand ballroom or a church with a vaulted ceiling, but in the rebuilt atrium of the Laura Grace Foundation, surrounded by women and children who had once thought they had nowhere else to go. Eleanor sat in the front row, tears in her eyes, a locket in her hand containing 2 pictures, one of Laura as a girl, one of Emily laughing beside Jack in the orchard. As Emily walked down the aisle, she held no bouquet, just her mother's letter. At the altar, she stopped before Jack and whispered the words she'd always wanted someone to believe. "I am not what I lost. I am what I chose to keep." He smiled. "I choose you." They danced under fireflies. No photographers, no grand speeches. Just 2 souls, found again. In the ashes. In the light, a quiet flame that stayed. The estate no longer felt like a museum of grief. It breathed again, not with grandeur, but with grace. With children's laughter echoing down the halls of what once was a ruin. With Emily's quiet footsteps between rooms that once swallowed her name. She didn't need portraits or signatures to belong anymore. She belonged because she chose to stay. In a world that told her to disappear. She stood. In a family that once buried her, she bloomed. In a legacy built on silence. She spoke. And in the ashes of everything they tried to erase, she found the most sacred thing of all. Herself. 1. True legacy isn't what you inherit, it's what you choose to rebuild. Emily didn't just reclaim a name, she gave it meaning by using her story to protect others. 2. Survival is not weakness, it's wisdom. She learned that grief doesn't make you unworthy, it makes you real. 3. Sometimes the family you're born into fails you, and still, you can rise. Even if the past tried to burn her out, she walked through it and brought light with her. 4. The most powerful act isn't revenge, it's returning with love. Not to fix what was broken, but to become something better. 5. We don't get to choose how our stories begin, but we always choose how they end. And hers ended not with fire, but with fireflies. If this story touched something in your heart, if you've ever felt lost, invisible, or like you had to fight just to be seen, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's still carrying the past like it's the only thing they have left. Because sometimes, the people who survive the most, the ones who become the light for everyone else. And maybe, that person is you.